Welcome to the Peak Provider NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I have the pleasure of having Myron Mann on the line with me. Now, Myron Mann is the CEO of the Bedford Group, who is the second largest employer of people with disability in Australia. Bedford is based in Adelaide, in South Australia, and they do a variety of things, including partnering with various organisations in the community, especially on the employment side, as well as offering services themselves. So today we're going to connect with Myron, because the Bedford Group is part of what's called Alliance 20 in Australia. And what that means is that they represent basically the top 25 providers in Australia. So it's really a pleasure to have Myron on today. So welcome to the podcast. It's great to connect with you.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So look, Myron, I'm a coach, right? So I do business coaching, and I'm fascinated by the scaling question of disability, because I think, as we were just alluding to before we press record, NDIS businesses need to be run as a business, and then, should we say, the success of that from a business point of view is the very oxygen that can be used to serve the purpose of the organization. So I suppose, let me open up with this. Bedford is focused on employment, and is the second largest in Australia in terms of providing those opportunities for people with disability. In order to get to the scale that you've gotten to, what have been the cornerstones of Bedford that have allowed it to reach such scale?
Yeah, so really, Bedford is a 78-year-old organization. It had its origins, funny enough, in employment for people who were recovering from tuberculosis after the war. And it sort of evolved into disability after cures for tuberculosis came, or they discovered that they didn't really need to segregate or isolate people with TB, as much as they were doing so when they didn't understand it. And so it's been around a long time, and it's always had an employment focus. But really, the scale has come about, in the last sort of 13 years, from sort of 2011 to 2024. The organization's gone. In terms of revenue, the scale's gone up, and it's probably doubled in that period. So it's gone from sort of 50 million revenue to 100 million, a little over 100 million in revenue in that period. The number of total clients that we support have actually only increased by about 15%. So you can see that there's been a focus on getting to a point where we have the ability to invest in Bedford to support what we do, but the number of clients have declined, and we may have a chat about why that's happening in supported employment around. It's not just in Adelaide or Bedford. It's happening across Australia. So most of that scale, Chris, has come about through merger with other organizations. In South Australia, Bedford has merged with Heritage, which was an organization that was sort of based out of Mount Gambier, but also had operations on the Yorke Peninsula and the western part of South Australia. It merged with the Phoenix Society, which was another large disability employer. So over time, those mergers have created a lot of that scale.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then in terms of, I suppose it's a good segue to partnerships here, because you've got things that Bedford do yourselves, I believe, from an employment perspective, but you also partner. Depending on the service, you've got some things you do yourself, but you kind of span everything from hospitality, landscaping, and grounds maintenance, manufacturing, and packaging, right? So some of them are in-house, and some of them you partner with. So could you go unpack that a little bit in terms of, again, how the breadth of the service that you provide?
Yeah, so it's probably good to explain that Bedford operates from 17 sites in South Australia. So we all the way as far west as Port Lincoln to as far east as Mount Gambier. But clearly, when we talk about numbers, they're concentrated in Metro Adelaide. In our manufacturing business, it's primarily it's dominated by our partnership with Bunnings. We make flat pack furniture for Bunnings. So it's a full manufacturing business. It starts with design, goes all the way to even communicating with the consumer after they bought a product, if they're struggling to figure out how to put it together. So it's a IKEA style, if you want to talk about flat pack furniture. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult to figure out the instructions.
Yes.
If you look at something like packaging, we would have a number of different people that we partner with, and primarily larger customers. But we do have some that are local customers and can even be quite seasonal. But because of the seasonality would come in things like we partner with the Royal Adelaide show. So if you're making show bags, we prepare most of those show bags. When the AFL had their gather round here, we put all the merchandise together for the in kits that went out to the schools around South Australia. So we have a lot of community partnerships with customers. In Mount Gambier, for example, we have a complete partnership with the two largest timber processing operators down there, and we take all of their waste. So if you think about a log, for example, when they cut that log to become a structural piece of timber, there's waste around, they square it off, so we get all the rounded bits off the end, and we convert all that into decking and pickets for picket fences, and that goes back to Timberlink, basically, who then sell that product. So the partnership with them is that they have a very high speed, a very high efficient structural timber business. They don't want to be doing the bits and pieces around the edge, so we do that for them, and then it goes back to them to sell. So it eliminates basically all the waste in that industry.
Gosh, I mean, this is there's elements of supply chain integration here. This is quite fascinating. Like, I know you've been, I believe, the CEO for about a year and a half at Bedford, so I'm sure that some of these partnerships have built up over many years. But what I find interesting is I know you've got a consumer goods background, so this just like takes me back to my IT days where I was doing supply chain stuff and talking about, like, I used to literally go to Unilever's factories in all the countries around the world and see how they'd go from manufacturing it to go to the distribution center and then the fulfillment out to the customers. Like, this just reminds me hugely of that. It's, I believe the term is vertical integration in terms of, the way the supply chains work. It's really innovative to say, like, how can we add value to the big players out there, whether it be, manufacturing of wood or Bunnings.
Well, one of the things that we've done, and I don't ever mind sharing our strategy, because my view is that we don't actually have competitors. I think our purpose is to support people with disabilities. So if someone gets an idea from us and that helps someone with a disability, then as far as I'm concerned, we're achieving our purpose. The problem you have in supported employment across Australia is it has its origins in the block funding, as we know. And block funding essentially drove businesses to create as many jobs as they could possibly create. So everyone went to the lowest value add point on the supply chain because that's where the jobs were that no one else wanted to do. So that's where we wound up as a sector when it comes to supported employment. And it's very hard to move from that small little piece of a supply chain that you just referred to sort of having multiple touch points on that supply chain. And think of the supply chain as a value chain as well. And so increasing the value of what we do in supported employment. So there's an opportunity then to get paid a price that has enough margin to actually make that business a sustainable business. So what we're trying to do is identify in every single case where we're trying to look at how do we touch more points on that. So if I go back to the Bunnings business, we start all the way with design and we deal all the way to the end consumer and everything in the middle. That is a perfect supported employment business model, and it's very sustainable. But if we're just simply counting widgets and putting them in bags, which is we see quite a lot in the packaging world, and we know why we're there, because that's where the jobs were, and no one wanted to do them. But you're never going to make that a sustainable proposition. You've got to have the ability to cross over more of that supply chain. And that's where we're trying to, what we call reimagine supported employment. But it takes time and it takes money to be able to transition. And I think that's where perhaps someone like a Bedford or some of the other larger organizations you referred to in the Alliance 20 probably have an opportunity that some of the smaller providers may not have, is they may have a balance sheet, that's strong enough to help.
Well, correct. Because I mean, I look in my business coaching days, I've also collaborated with accelerator programs with various universities. And so this literally reminds me not just of supply chain, but that, because, even those 4 or 5, partnership divisions that you've got, like each one of them is that kind of mindset of truly entrepreneurially, what problem can we fix for the broader market, especially B2B, that those partners, either don't have the capacity or the inclination or whatever. You're literally solving it for them, because that's what business is. That's what value is. Like literally, how quickly can you get the solution to the customer, and what innovative, unique value proposition do you have that no one else can offer? Like it's a true entrepreneur's mindset, actually. So I think it's great, because I'm sure that can you tell us about some of the, should we say, the benefits that the participants get to experience as a result of that level of thinking? Because it's not, as you say, just seeing individual widgets. It's seeing basically an organizational structure for each division. Like what's the flow-on benefit to the participants involved?
Well, the flow, I mean, I think interesting. We refer to it as the Bedford social supply chain. So that's how we sort of code name internally. And one of the things we look at in there is clearly when you look at supported employment, and I'll get to the answer to your question. Clearly, when you look at supported employment, one of the issues that is sort of concerns people is the level of productivity in a let's say in a supported employment environment. I mean, how many, whatever your products you're producing, how many can you produce in an hour? And that's where your cost comes from. We think the opportunity to automate some of those processes and to allow participants to then work with technology. So, for example, in our manufacturing, we're building a new manufacturing facility at the moment, because the facility, the building we're in and the property we're in is really not fit for purpose anymore. It's got it's an old building, and we need a new building. But in that process, we are automating a lot of the production. So there'll be robotic packing, for example. So our supported employees will be able to operate the robots or maintain the robots. So things that we've never done in a packaging world. We've simply had a cardboard box and put all the cut pieces of a flat pack furniture into the cardboard box, taped it up, and sent it off. Whereas this will be the robot actually doing the work. And we've got some examples of those sorts of things around things like where we're doing filling of liquids in bottles, whether it's olive oil or we actually bottle gin and do a lot of different things here, where we've been able to automate those things, and that our employees are able to then to work with the technology as opposed to actually pouring something into a bottle, which is one much cooler thing to be doing, obviously, and two, it's challenging their ability to actually do something different.
Well, exactly. That's really interesting, because that speaks a lot to your balance sheet advantage, clearly, right? Because like my extended family, my cousins and uncles and aunties back in the UK, they've got manufacturing businesses, so they literally they have factories where they do this kind of stuff. And I know that they'll go over to Germany and say, right, we're spending £10 million on the next machine. It takes again, it's that supply chain attitude and that accelerator style business attitude to. Yeah, but it's great because it also, I suppose, like one of the many benefits is that it's kind of, for want of a better word, it's cooler. Like it's really, it's doing exactly the same cutting edge stuff that any other manufacturing business is doing. And isn't it wonderful that participants get to, to get to be part of that journey? So I'm sure there's many flow-on effects.
Yeah, and it's the fact that it's cooler is hopefully is going to solve one of the issues that we see in supported employment. There are not many school leavers who think it's very cool to come to work at an ADE, or and so there's I don't know if it's the right word, but I think there's a bit of a stigma around it, and so but it is kind of cool if you if you're there and you're programming a robot, or you're operating a robot. That's not the same as counting things and putting them in a bag or a box. So
Yes.
uh, I think we as an industry or as a sector have kind of been lazy in the way that, and I think and this is where I probably will say the NDIS has done an enormous amount of good for so many people.
Mm.
You don't want to criticize the NDIS, but employment has been a very odd fit into NDIS for some time. And I know it has origins that go back. There was arguments about whether it should or shouldn't have been in there. But the problem with the employment in NDIS, it's just a cost reimbursement scheme for supports. It doesn't drive an outcome. And so as an industry or as a sector, I think we've been very lazy at sort of reinventing what we do. We've sort of taken the NDIS funding and tried to pigeonhole it back in the old block funding business model, and it just simply doesn't work.
Mm.
So I think one of the things that we're doing in terms of you're right, it's expensive to do this. It's millions of pounds or millions of dollars to do this. So one of the things we've done is we've set up a whole nother arm of Bedford, which we call social enterprises. Now, those social enterprises are not NDIS registered. They are what we would refer to as open employment.
Okay.
So everyone's paid a full award wage. There's no supported wage in there. And that also allows us to attract external capital through impact investment. So we can actually give a financial and a social return to help us pay to automate these manufacturing facilities, because we're going to spend $50 million over the next 5 years. Now, we're not going to bleed Bedford dry doing that. We're going to bring other investors along with us who are looking for that S in the ESG, which is hard to find.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's interesting. It reminds me of I set up a charity 10 years ago that was the chairman of, and it was an NFP, obviously. But I always took the attitude of run it like a business. And then it got to a certain point where I recognized I couldn't do so. I couldn't really achieve anything just on the grants, right? And my kind of shift in my mindset was, from a for-purpose business perspective, you can often make a greater impact when you just do the social enterprise for purpose, but also for profit kind of business model, which is kind of what you just described. Like, you're saying, actually, this manufacturing opportunity makes sense by itself from an investment point of view. So isn't it great that all different types of investor and stakeholder can be involved? Like the self-fulfillment that it proves itself. I think that's a really powerful model.
Yeah, it has to excuse me, it has to stand up on its own.
Yes.
It can't be something that has to be subsidized from some other part of your organization. So there's a financial return, but the financial return doesn't necessarily have to be as sharp as it may be in the private equity world, or and it may not have to be as short term as in the private equity world. There are impact investors out there who are looking to make a difference from a social standpoint, but they still want a financial return on their money. So this is where it makes sense for us to tap into that particular market. So we have the two arms of Bedford. One is everything NDIS sits in one legal entity, and we've got the social enterprises that are separate legal entities so that they can actually attract investment either in equity or debt.
That's really interesting. Now, if we just zoom out for a second and talk about the broader NDIS industry, going beyond Bedford, right? Let's talk about the industry levels. And what from your point of view, because you're a CEO of a large organization, you're part of Alliance 20. What are the biggest challenges that you see broadly across the industry, and how is Bedford responding to those challenges?
Yeah, I probably have a slightly different view than a lot of my colleagues, because I don't come from the disabilities sector. I see this real lack of coordination, particularly at government level. and I see this lack of inclusion of all the stakeholders when it comes to solving some of these problems. So that lack of coordination I'm talking about is, you've got the NDIS, you've got DSS, you've got Centrelink with the pensions, you've got the Fair Work Commission determining what the wages are. You go on, and then you even got an Australian disability strategy, which doesn't seem to be coordinated with anything else that's going on. It seems to, it to me, there's just the approach is too fragmented. There needs to be an umbrella approach to bring all this together, to say all these things need to work together. And I know that they're not working together, because we have conversations with the people in DSS that around the support pension and the block of getting people to move from supported employment to open employment, and the concern over their pension. And they're not even really aware of that they are blocked. The rules that they have are set up originally, but they've not been coordinated with the objective of government to move people into open employment. So they themselves are one of the biggest roadblocks to getting there. The other part of it is I don't think you ever saw. I think Australia's in a unique position. I think we're small enough as a country to have the agility to actually talk about these things and fix them. You can imagine trying to do that in the UK and the US. You probably would struggle. But we're large enough to maybe influence how this might, other people might do this around the world. But if we don't bring in the providers, the government, the peak industry bodies, the advocates, the voices of participants, everyone needs to be in the room when we have these conversations. But because deep down, Chris, I actually think we're all trying to get to the same answer. I think we're all trying to get to the same. We're coming at it from a lot of different angles, and sometimes we look like we're opposites to each other, when in fact I don't believe we are.
That's really interesting, and I agree completely, especially through the lens of the employment part of the should we say societal and cultural challenge, because when it comes to disability support pensions, for example, when I studied economics, I believe the term is the benefits trap. It's something like that, and the idea there is that if you're on your DSP, then at a certain inflection point, what's my natural motivation to go out and work 20 hours a week or 30 hours a week? Because hey, I could sit back and do that and still get my DSP. It kind of like, why should I kind of thing. So you get trapped in that zone, right? And that's a societal problem, just in terms of what's appropriate and fair. But it's also like a risk and a liability issue, because when you've got that benefits gap, for once, I know it's not a benefit, but it's a true disability support pension, but it's the concept, right? The reason that's a problem is it leads to a black market of work, right? So then it leads to potentially people with disability going on to, say, a construction site and doing cash in hand jobs, etc. And they're going on and they've got no insurance. So what if they get injured? Or what happens if they have, something kicks in where they need support from a disability point of view? But that's a black market event. Literally, the support worker's not there, they're not insured, they don't exist, and they get injured, right? So it's a huge issue, isn't it, in terms of safety as well as the cultural problem?
It is. It does, and that's the benefit of an NDIS registered provider who is subject to the compliance and regulation of the commission, and in every incident's reported, investigated. That's the benefit of all that. And I would also make the point, when you talk about the broader community, I think the same issue exists in something like SIL, in supported independent living. It's there's not at the moment, there's a lot of discussion around what the solution is, but I'm not sure all the parties are actually sitting in the right place to come to. I think that the problem there is probably very similar to employment. But it doesn't have that commercial revenue piece that employment does. But that's a problem that's got to be solved, because you're talking about a very small number of participants that are quite equates to about a third of the NDIS spend.
Yes, it does. It's interesting, and they're a third of the SIL part of the sector is the third monetarily, but in terms of like agency managed participants, in terms of quantity of participants, is about 10 or 12% of the market.
Yeah.
So like there's a much smaller number of participants, and every provider is wanting to kind of monetarily, they're wanting to try and get to that level where they can be a SIL operator. But, you know, again, from a almost ethics point of view and all of that, like just because someone wants to go there doesn't mean that necessarily that they're good enough to be there. And of course, this is why you need to be registered. And this is why we've got the practice standards and the commission. And I get that. But again, it's kind of a bit of a, you know, you've got a lot of people scrambling for that goal, right? And I think it's really important that it's done right, isn't it, in terms of the, you know, the well-being of participants.
Yeah. And I think, you know, if you go back to the origins of the NDIS in the context of the question, you know, it is an insurance scheme. It wasn't really designed to be a welfare scheme. And yet, you know, and yet when you look at all the things that got included into the NDIS, I think it's very difficult to define it as an insurance scheme today. And I think that's what the review panel will be looking at. You know, we'll probably find out in October, you know, a little bit more.
Well, exactly.
Review, that review may potentially be extended, because I think it's probably becoming quite an interesting conversation that's going on between participants and providers and the government.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, we mentioned SIL. Tell us a little bit about your SIL operations. I believe you've got a place south of the CBD in Adelaide, I believe.
We do. We have now, you know, we are a very small SIL provider.
Okay.
We historically have been in SIL. We owned a property called Ballyana, which has always been an accommodation facility. We are in the process of designing a complete redevelopment of that property. It's a very sort of late 60s, early 70s property. It needs a lot of rethinking in terms of the way it's laid out. It's a large piece of property, so we do have some issues around density rules and things like that will struggle potentially to make it economical. So it'll wind up being some form of a mixed community, a mixed community. We wanted it to become a tech hub where we could do a lot of training for people with disability in the tech world. Unfortunately, under the NDIS, if it sort of looks or smells like education, no one wants to have a conversation about it.
Oh, that's such a shame, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's what needs to happen, right? You've got to integrate training.
This is part of the issue, is that you're never going to get people into open employment without the opportunity to train them. And the training has to not just be in the technical side or the vocational side. It has to also be in life skills. It has to be in all sorts of areas. So I think we need to think about how that happens. If you go back and just look at the numbers, there's only today, well, the quoted numbers about 16,000 people in supported employment. I suspect it's much lower than that, but and that's continued to drop over the past few years. So the cost of doing it is not significant. We're not, the NDIS has got almost 600,000 participants. We're talking about 15 to 16,000 in supported employment. And maybe there's only 20% of those that are going to want to move into open employment for whatever the reason. So you're talking about a very small number of people that really do need that training in order to be. You can't just, I think that the thing that concerns me is and we've seen this, 60% of the people at Bedford that go into open employment outside of Bedford return back to Bedford.
60% return?
Yeah, they don't stay in open employment. Okay. Now, why is that? Okay, they go off to Coles or Woolies or wherever, and they get a job, and that job might be collecting the trolleys or stacking the shelves or whatever. It doesn't inspire them. It doesn't. They often are socially isolated, and most employers either are scared or don't know how to deal with things like intellectual disability or whatever, and so they find the environment too overwhelming, and they return back to somewhere where they're comfortable. And that's not what we're trying to achieve. So, um, yeah, I think education is part of the answer to this. And
Yes.
that's just why I think we have to get everybody to the table and have a conversation as to how do we do
Mm.
this.
I thoroughly agree. I used to work in the vet sector, so work with
Yeah,
RTOs, and I think that,
yeah,
broadly, Australia is very good at things like, for example, there's the school-based apprenticeship and
yep,
traineeship programs for your
yep,
teenagers, right? There's a bunch of funding that you can do for the various states and territories in terms of employment skills, and it's set up pretty well. But it sounds like there's definitely an opportunity to integrate the great value that the vet sector broadly does, but just integrate it better with the
I think
NDIS.
it needs to be. I mean, training can be funded in the NDIS, but it's really on the job training. It's not
Yes.
it's not an educational setting. And so if you can imagine a campus, for example, at Valiana, where the people with disability had short-term accommodation, there was a partnership with TAFE here in South Australia, for example, to have the right sort of skill sets there to do the education. People could come and go and actually benefit from that, and they graduate out of that into open employment. It's a far better feeder into open employment than trying to get people out of the current supported employment providers into open employment, in my view. But
Yeah, yeah.
that's going to take some conversation at a very high level.
It does, and I think that as well as, say, for example, a participant being the beneficiary of perhaps some vocationally nationally accredited
Yep,
courses, where's the Cert 3 and Cert 4s, that
yep,
need to be better integrated, as well as
yeah,
that, in say, for example, the Coles and Woolies example, it sounds like inclusivity and diversity is the big thing that we all talk about nowadays, right? So if that's truly to be achieved in the broader corporate world, it does sound that like the managers and the fellow co-workers of, it's not about Coles and Woolies here, but I'm saying whichever businesses they work in,
yeah.
that type of training that's it basically empowers them to know and understand how they can support people that are working there that might have a disability.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm clearly not having a go at Coles and Woolies. It could be
No,
any
no, it's not about
workplace.
that. It's about the
Yeah,
broader sector,
but
like
yeah,
having
but
mechanisms, right?
we have a
Yeah.
trial running at the moment with RM Williams here in South Australia, and we've got some Bedford employees who they're looking for employees. They're trying to move as much production back from overseas into Australia.
Mhm.
Um, so we've got we had an opportunity to seek out expressions of interest to people who might like to work at REM Williams. So we had 8 or 10 people sign up. They've taken the first 2 in there. They have a job coach who is supplied by Bedford, and their NDIS plan will pay for that job coach. So they're learning the job at RM Williams around boot making, and
Mhm.
once they finish their probation, so at the moment they are a Bedford employee, but they're paid a full award wage. They're not paid a supported wage, so they're
Okay.
paid roughly $22 an hour. Um, Once they go off of probation, they'll move to be an RM Williams employee at that point, and they'll have access to the job coach on an as-need basis.
Mhm.
Whenever they feel they need some support, they can bring their job coach, and the job coach can come along. So this is a very innovative program by RM Williams and Bedford, sort of working together to try to figure out uh, to solve a problem that they have. They can't find enough workforce to bring back the production from overseas
Mhm.
because of the low unemployment rate that we have
Mhm.
at the moment. But we have one of the things I keep trying to say to the community when I go out and talk to the community is think of Bedford as this. We have over 1,000 strong workforce that are
Mhm.
very loyal and very capable.
Mhm.
We have 17 sites in South Australia, so we have floor space if you need to scale up and you don't have the capital to do it. And we also have capital if we think a partnership with you is beneficial, we would potentially invest our own capital into helping you scale up. So instead of trying to sell cheap labor, if I can put it that way,
Yep.
which is what a lot of people think supported employment is. It's actually not. When you actually work out what it costs, it's about $40 an hour when you put the wages and supports in there. And so it's not cheap labor. What we're trying to say is we have the ability to partner with you and scale your business, and you don't have to do it all by yourself. And so if we can kind of change the thinking, around what supported employment can mean in the future, then I think there are opportunities that we haven't even thought of yet.
I love that. That's a very clear expression of the value proposition. So like when I'm coaching a smaller provider, I'll say your value proposition has to be, quantified, differentiated, right? It's literally how you stand out. And then that quantification, that's brilliant what you just said. 1,000 employees, 17 sites, capital, wow, that and for other, smaller providers, even if they're not in the supported employment arena, and these are the types of things that, we can all do as providers to stand out. I think it also speaks to, I think there's kind of like two attitudes that if we talk about the broader market for a second again, for the small to medium providers that are growing, one attitude is the dog eat dog competitive attitude and trying to, grab and steal participants and all that stuff. And that's like a certain type of consciousness, right? The attitude I like to encourage and take myself is, look, it's collaboration. There's more than enough work for us all. And in order to be an ethical provider, of course, that phrase of person-centered, it really matters, right? So like, your individual ego or your individual profit and loss, that's not what's actually really at stake here. It's about the life of the person with disability. So there's more than enough work. We just need to work together and find these little, spots of opportunity to work, with one another. Don't see each other as competitors.
But we don't. I mean,
no, I know you don't. But
we have
like,
regular interaction with all of the other disability providers here in South Australia. We cry on each other's shoulder when we have to, and we sit down and help each other solve problems when we have to. And so we regularly visiting each other and talking to each other.
I love that. And, I hope that's a spirit of encouragement for, those listening as well. In terms of community access, so I believe that Bedford actually took a conscious choice to rebrand community access and lifestyle into Bedford Experiences. Can you tell us about that and, some of the programs that you've, put in place and what types of things you've achieved as a result?
Sure. So there's a part of our organization is referred to as day options and experiences. So day options is what we traditionally know is that a lot of providers provide. The experience side it occurs really on a 7-day-a-week program. So and occurs sometimes after hours. So we do have people who might be in employment who come over to experiences after employment or after hours. So experiences could include almost anything. So just some examples of those sorts of things are sailing, fishing, cooking. We sponsor inclusion leagues for footy and soccer. So we have teams, and other providers have teams, and so they and an inclusion league can be really people of all abilities, but from lots of different backgrounds, and often they're disadvantaged backgrounds that come together and play sport. People suggest activities from time to time, and we try to incorporate them. So we've, like when the Gather Round football was here, we bought, I think, 100 tickets or something like that, and so that was part of the experiences that our cohort, a lot of them would never have been to an AFL game, and so they had an opportunity to go to that. So we sponsor a program that's part of, in South Australia, there's a program called SOLA, South Australian Living Artists, and it has exhibitions once a year. We have an art room. We have artists here, and they exhibit their artwork in that annual program and have a chance to sell their artwork.
Mhm.
So where we do have artists, we help them. If they have their own little website, we might help them in the background with administering that. Everything they do, we provide all the materials, but any money they get for their artwork goes directly back to them, not to us. So we do provide, and we also have little micro businesses. So we have
Cool.
several rooms set up where some of our experiences participants have little businesses,
Yep.
anything from sort of painting cups to making dog treats,
Yep.
that they might do in the kitchen, and then they need to be packaged up and that sort of thing. And so we coach them through how to set this up as a business. How do you record your financial information and all that sort of stuff. So it's a pretty broad
Mm.
category. So I think that's kind of why we thought, okay, let's maybe take this thing away from this concept of community access
Yes.
and living, and let's start talking about all those various experiences that we can provide to our participants that maybe they don't have easy access to anywhere else.
Love it. Yeah, because I mean, what that does is it shifts the conversation into wellness, human
Mm,
expression, and true empowerment. In the example of the small business idea, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because that's how I see it, right? Like my cousin back in the UK, he has Down syndrome, and and like I've seen all sorts of varying scales of quality in terms of the places that he's lived, right? And
yeah,
it's one of the things that irks me, but also drives me in terms of like wanting to actually do a better job so that as a sector
mm,
we got to make a true impact on finding ways to bring joy, to bring joy and genuine purpose and pursuit to the
yeah,
individual's life, right? That's
yeah,
really crucial.
yeah.
So yes, it's not just should we say reading off the title from the price guide, right?
No, no,
It's way more than that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I keep using the word internally. We have to reimagine this.
Yes.
That we can't just follow the script
Mhm.
because the script's not going anywhere, and so we have to rethink this. So we've got this little typical. You would have seen it in all your coaching, and we've got this typical little life cycle curve
Mhm.
that basically says these are all the things we do at Bedford, and these are where they're positioned on this life cycle curve. So we've got some very early stage programs like some of our social enterprises, and we're relying on those to sort of eventually grow and shift up that curve. And then we've got a whole bunch of them sitting over here on the almost past maturity stage. They've
Mhm.
either got to be exited or they've got to be completely reinvented. Um, and so we've sort of tried to use that to demonstrate to all of our team here.
Yeah.
Um, these are the ones we're reimagining over here. These are the ones we're counting on to take us forward because they're gonna want to have to support this while we do this. And it's been an interesting way of trying to get the management team and senior leadership team at Bedford to really understand the strategy and also the risk involved. So
Mm. Gosh, I tell you what, it just reminds me so much of accelerator programs. It's like you're saying, hey, we've got all these organisms that are evolving and growing in at different stages, and we need to see them from this life cycle perspective and recognize that they're not uniform and linear. They're all at individual stages, and they need
they
nurturing.
are,
Yeah.
yeah.
Gosh, that's fascinating.
And we even stuck corporate overhead in the mature thing and said we got to reimagine corporate overhead too because it is there's so much pressure on compliance and regulation and this sort of thing. The pressure on IT,
Mhm.
the pressure on branding and all, because we know probably what's coming from the Royal Commission. So there's a lot to do in all these areas, but you can't just keep stacking costs in there. We've got to figure out another way to do this. So
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, I mean, it's so clear that you're doing so much to innovate in terms of we'll use the term reimagining approaches. What is Bedford doing in terms of embracing technology to solve problems?
uh, well, I'll exclude ChatGPT, who I
I do love
I
a bit of
I
chat GPT, but
I,
go
I,
on.
I put your questions into Chat GPT and said, what do you think what do you think would be a good a typical response? Some of them that were more global, but it's interesting what you can do with Chat GPT. But look, technology wise, it's a bit embarrassing, but I would have to say Bedford is probably, it's an area where there's an enormous gap, and
Okay.
and we haven't invested what we needed to invest.
Mm.
I think in some ways, uncertainty has made it easy for decisions to be made not to invest. That people have looked at, well, let's wait and see what the review has and the commission says and the
Yeah.
Fair Work stuff happens, and yet that's the wrong approach. If you're going to let all those external influences drive your sustainability, then that's
Mm-hmm.
wrong. So we've got a lot of catching up to do. I mean,
Okay.
with this year we'll spend about 2% of revenue, $2 million on new technology.
Mm.
I think that for me that number should be 4 or 5%, but we got to get there. I think the other thing is that in that technology is really around simplifying everything we do,
Mm-hmm.
and stop shuffling paper and having everything in Excel spreadsheets and all those sorts of things. So there are benefits to investing in that technology. But beyond that,
Mm.
one of the things that does concern me
Mm.
is the amount of, I'll just use the word waste, administrative waste,
Yes.
between NDIS and providers. I look at the improvements in technology, all these other areas of government that, my 21-year-old daughter can go on the ATO and file her own tax return by herself now. I don't understand why all this cost that's in plan management and navigating the NDIS is so difficult. Why this can't be simplified through applications that providers can directly feed into this, and I think there's big money to be saved.
Yes.
If providers and the agency and participants work together. And I suspect we might hear that out of the review, because I know that one of the top areas of concern from participants is
Mm-hmm.
actually support, coordination, and plan management. And
that's very interesting you say that. I had Brendan Grail, who's
yeah,
a top CEO on, and he made that exact point around the future of the NDIS. He said that there is, should we say, potential for identification of economic wastage, just because there's an inefficiency of even the way plan management in particular works. And so it's not having to go at plan managers. They do a great, amazing job, but in this day, my analogy would be the blockchain, right? So if we talk about, I'll go
exactly what should be happening.
Well, it is, right? So I'll go geeky for a second. Not just Bitcoin, you've got things like Ethereum, and Ethereum can do contracts. So what that means is you can have multiple parties involved, and then the blockchain says, these are the terms of the contract, and this is the transaction that's coming through. Have you met all the criteria? Tick, 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 tick. Authorized transaction. So, to do a day-to-day example, let's say you do conveyancing and you're buying a house. Blockchain will solve problems like that. So when it comes to, say, plan management, it will be an interesting thing to keep an eye out for, won't it? Because ultimately there are so many ways that you can systematize in that literally blockchain-based contracts to say, like, hey, here's an invoice. Does the participant authorize it? Is it between a threshold? Yes, no. Like, could the government just build a technological solution that just does that? And it would be a scary change for that part of the sector, because it might render it challenged.
I look, it's crying out for a complete disruption. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, because there's, you see plan managers being sold for tens of millions of dollars now. I mean, so there's a whole industry being created around this, which never should have actually ever happened, in my view.
Right.
I mean, you look at that blockchain technology in the U.S. now. There are places in the U.S. now where you literally buy a house while you're inspecting it through the mobile phone app. So the banks are in, the real estate agents in. So you swap a contract right there on your mobile phone by the fact that all that can happen in seconds, really, with blockchain technology, and be completely secure. And so that's what's going to happen here. Eventually, it may be 10 years before we see that. But
Hmm.
you'll go to inspect the house and you'll say, I'll have it. And they accept the price, and the whole app takes care of the rest.
That's really interesting. And then when it comes to, should we say, grassroots providers that are doing, whatever service, whether it be a SIL or personal care or community or whatever, I can imagine a world where basically the same thing. Like, here is a
Yeah.
service agreement, dum dum dum, exchange, sign. Like, it's just,
Yep.
yeah. That's fascinating. I love it.
Yeah.
So look, let me ask you one final question. We've got October coming up. There are many things that we're watching out for in the industry. If you just say, what are the top one or two things that are on your radar? What do you see as the things that you're looking out for in the next 12 months?
Yeah. I suspect that one of the I'm not sure what'll come out of the Royal Commission.
Hmm.
I think we probably all sort of brace for for some pretty harsh comments that potentially could come out of the Royal Commission. Uh, I think we understand that the NDIS review and the Royal Commission and the workforce sort of white paper will all come down about the same time.
Yeah.
The next budget in May is an election budget, so you would think that some of this is going to find its way. At least they're going to have to sort of get a little bit of it into the election budget to start to say we're doing something. I don't think government will find it easy to move too quick, but they'll need to find a way to incorporate most of probably what comes out of those reviews in the Royal Commission. So I would think there's multiple areas of NDIS that will get challenged in this. Supported employment being obviously one of them.
Okay.
I think we'll have to move to some form of supported employment as we know it today will probably not exist in 3 to 5 years time, whatever time frame you think it is. It'll be something different. It'll be something else. There will be a cohort of people that require enormous support. So there will be some model that we use. I think there'll be, my personal view, Chris, is there'll be sector consolidation, just on the basis that that's what happens in most commercial markets. I don't see this any differently. If I look at it that way, that there'll be providers that probably need to merge. There'll be providers that probably exit certain things that they're doing today because they'll focus on one.
Mm-hmm.
SIL will be completely reinvented. It has to be. It's there are too many providers that are on the edge at the moment. So that's if we don't see a reinventing of that, I think that's going to become a problem for the sector.
Yes.
Is the whole SIL. I think there will be an emergence. This is my view. I think, and this is why we're going down this path. I think there will be an emergence of what we call a social enterprise when it comes to employment, where it is for purpose and it is for profit, and that profit is reinvested back in that purpose, and it will allow funding to occur, from external providers, just like any other capital market that we all might be familiar with. Why should this sector be any different? And then the last thing is, I think technology will disrupt a whole lot of this area of support coordination, local area coordinators, plan management. I just can't see. For me, plan management is crying out for Uber to solve this problem. With an app that makes everything so convenient, and I think it will. I think there are people out there who are starting to nibble at the edges of it, and I think we're looking at it. And I also think you'll find that potentially providers like a Bedford would have an interest in investing in other social enterprises with disability, maybe not necessarily run by Bedford, but just by virtue of our own balance sheet, we would be looking for the same investment that other people would. So
exactly.
So those are the kinds of things. And I guess the last one really is I can only cling to the sort of concept that that there will be some form of coordination across the government. I think
Yes.
this fragmentation of where everything sits and operating in very much in silos
Mm.
is part of the bigger issue.
Well,
And
it's really obvious that Bedford is leading the way in terms of that collaborative spirit, and creating solutions that self-sustain for their own reasons. I'm sure that you'll be able to provide many case studies that even the government can learn from.
yeah,
So yeah, this has been fascinating. Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, you're
It's
welcome,
been good.
Myron.
Thank you. I've loved the questions in the conversation.
Yeah, likewise, sir. I've learned a lot from this. Yeah, fantastic to have a conversation today. So, Myron Mann from Bedford Group, it's been a pleasure having you on. Just for those listening, and by way of a quick mention, my name's Chris Hall. Our business is Peak Provider. If you're a provider that wants to scale through sales and marketing, get more leads, convert more signups, all that jazz, get in contact. That's what we do. Myron, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today.
Thank you, Chris. And please come see us anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to the next time across that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers.